Hello YouTube, my name's Marie, and today we're going to talk about the Korean drama W. W follows a doctor who gets sucked into her father's comic. I believe they call it a manhwa in the show, but I'm not sure the terminology. I don't really read comics, so is it a comic or a webtoon or a manhwa? Like, I don't know the terminology. Anyways, she gets sucked into this kind of action revenge story, and it's all about her interactions with the male lead of that comic. As this is a rewatch for me, I first watched W in 2016 while it was originally airing, and W has just been on my mind lately, and specifically the premise of it all. It was bothering me because I couldn't remember why I felt so unsatisfied with the story. Like, I remembered it was very well produced and I really liked the actor involved. He's one of my favorites. So I decided to give it a rewatch. Spoiler warning right here, just because it is a rewatch for me, and I do want to discuss some of the big picture plot points, so I won't talk any specifics, but if you're very sensitive to spoilers, you know, this might not be a review for you, although I don't think anything I'm going to say would ruin a first viewing. Again, this came out in 2016, so if you haven't watched it yet, like, are you going to? And W starts so strong. My only complaint is of the soundtrack. It's like Skyrim music. You know. Skyrim music. And I found this really epic soundtrack and music selection very jarring at first, but as the story and the show continues, the stakes build. So near the end, I was really enjoying the soundtrack because it matched more of the tone of what was happening on screen. I do think that maybe they should have had something less intense for the first couple of episodes because the story isn't as intense, so they don't really match. So you're introduced to these characters. They're all lovable. I have nothing wrong to say with them, and you get invested in them quite quickly, and like the plot moves really fast. Where the show stumbles, I don't remember the exact episode, but I would say it's maybe like a quarter of the way through the series, and that is because the writers employ the worst plot device in the history of plot devices, and that is memory loss. I hate the memory loss trope or plot device. It's so freaking annoying to me. But I'll just say that in this case, they do the plot device of memory loss probably the best I've ever seen it, because the memory loss has a legitimate purpose within the story and it matches with the narrative. It's not just thrown in there for cheap drama the way it usually is. My problem with the memory loss is kind of twofold. One thing, the memory never comes back, like the male lead never recovers the memories and the really relationship building and all those things that happened within the first quarter of the show. He never recovers those things, and so it never feels quite the same. The show loses a lot of charm, in my opinion, once he loses his memory. And I mean, you as the viewer know that you have a good portion left of the show. You know that the two are going to eventually reconnect and they're going to get involved again somehow, because the show's obviously not over yet. But the writers never truly take the time to reinvest in their relationship. I mean, they do try and emotionally manipulate you, but that's not the same thing as truly investing time with the characters to let them rebuild a connection. And what I mean by emotionally manipulating is that the show does this really awful thing. One of the worst things it does ever is that it will show you characters' plans, like step by step by step by step, and it'll show it unfold the way they want it to with a long voiceover, and these sequences are very long, and their plans never go the way they want them to, so it's like you have these really long sequences that never happen, and they're just a total waste of your time. But what the female lead does a lot within these sequences of make-believe is that she imagines a lot of relationship milestones that she wants to do with the male lead. So like you get these cute scenes of them going on bike rides and eating ice cream and having these cute dates, and she introduces him to her mom and all these things, but they don't actually happen. I got the distinct impression that the writers were trying to distract me, like, oh look, they don't actually do them, and they don't actually reinvest in each other, and they don't actually spend those cute moments. Near the end, they do form a bond, but again, it's very, very different from what it was in the beginning, and that feels more of a bond due to survival and not a bond created from mutual trust and mutual love. And even in the very last episode of the very last scene, I did not believe that the male lead had fallen in love with the female lead again, and that's partly because I had actually fallen out of love with her. She loses a lot of personality and characterization near the end of the show, and I mean, it does make sense. You know, she goes through a lot of heartbreak, so she's not the same person that she was in the beginning, but I could not tell you what her character actually is at the end. She just kind of exists to be the female lead and the romance interest, and I think that's very interesting because it kind of leads to one of the points that I really do enjoy about this show, and is it discusses a lot of author concepts like motive, and seems very self-aware. Like the show seems very self-aware. The writing world and like things like you have to know someone's backstory even if you don't tell their backstory, like that's a main issue with the villain of the comic book world, being that the female lead's father, the one who writes this comic book, never actually gave the villain a backstory or gave the villain a face, and that's a major plot point. So it seems weird to me that near the end of the show, all of a sudden this main character becomes an archetype, and I'm talking about the female lead. The last 2 episodes I think is very self-indulgent on the writer's part. I feel like they bring back a lot of issues and a lot of conflicts that I felt like we were done and over with, specifically with that antagonist or the villain of the comic book. He does come back, and that whole arc and storyline to do with the villain and the father, like the comic book writer, I felt very tired of it. I was like, I'm done with it, let's move on. Although it did lead to what I think was the most memorable death of the show, and that's another issue with this show, is that the stakes at the end just don't feel real. So there's an issue with pacing, because all of these like really climactic emotional things are happening, but you as the viewer, or at least me as the viewer, I did not believe that any of these things were going to be permanent, because, you know, people have died and come back to life multiple times already, so like why should I invest or be emotionally invested in this scene where someone is dying or being hurt when I'm like, you bring people back all the time. Overall, the script, in my opinion, is the weakest part of this because the action is so good. I was blown away by my rewatch of this because it did come out in 2016, so I had checked my expectations, like I had put them in check, and I'm like, okay, a lot has happened with the filming industry in Korea. I think they've improved exponentially in the last couple of years, so like put your expectations down a notch. But no, this looks fantastic. The fight choreography looks so good and just so believable, and I had so much fun with it. And then also the effects of people like switching back and forth between the comic book world and the real world, I really, really loved it. Like, yeah, the acting is phenomenal. Like, rewatching the show and just seeing, I'm really trying, guys. Is it Lee Jong-suk? Is that his name? I'm really trying to remember, because he is one of my favorite actors, and his acting in this show is so good. It's so understated, and you can just see the wheels turning in his head, and I love him. And the reason why I think that the script is the weakest part is because there is a very fine line between a complex and smart story and a convoluted story. And this show kind of like tips its toe in both sides. Overall, I'm gonna give W a 3.75 out of 5 stars. I do think it's such a fun time. Alright everybody, that is it from me. I hope you have a good day, have a good night, bye!